I got friends only wanna talk business. I got expensive, cause winning's expensive. I got expensive, cause winning's expensive. I've been reading all the war, and I've been shutting down the stars. Yeah, cause when it rains and it pours.
Hey, and welcome to Put That Coffee Down this week here on FreightWaves TV. It is 12 p.m. Eastern Time sharp, and we are going to talk about sales because this is the Freight Sales Show for Closers, and I'm Kevin Hill, your host, as always, for 3 years now. And it's a special episode. It is the 3-year anniversary of Put That Coffee Down, and as a special treat and guest, we have the other OG who started the show with me, the other original co-host of Put That Coffee Down, and the current host of What the Truck here on FreightWaves TV, none other than Dooner. And you can see us starting out in the podcast booth on floor 1 of FreightWaves HQ back right before the pandemic. There we are on our first episode wearing our vests to show solidarity with the freight sales pros all across the land. Dooner, welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show.
Kevin, what's the matter? You couldn't read the cue cards with the Edna glasses on 3 years into it, and you got the name of the show wrong. Because everyone else does too. Everyone always comes up to me, and you're talking to me last week about it. Put this coffee down, and I confused that and this. Here's the thing: it's a litmus test. If you haven't seen Glengarry Glen Ross, like, before you listen to any of these other podcasts and you're in sales, go rent the damn movie. I think it's on Hulu, right? Just get the movie, watch it. You know and Kevin, know what's crazy? Like, when we started this thing, you mentioned it, you showed the thing right before the pandemic in February 2020. And at the time, the landscape of like LinkedIn influencers and like sales shows, they didn't exist yet, right? And now there's like a dozen shows in freight sales alone that have coffee in the title. But we were first.
There are. It's a very popular word. Everyone wants to have coffee in the morning, and our show has nothing to do with coffee whatsoever. It has nothing to do with coffee, and you don't even have to rent the movie. Go watch the 12-minute scene with Alec Baldwin from Glengarry Glen Ross. You can YouTube it. You can watch it for free. And if you watch that scene and don't go rent the movie or go find it on Prime or whatever, I don't know if you're a true salesperson, because that scene is the ultimate of everything. And everyone knows that second part to that line, coffee is for closers only. Well, it starts out with put that coffee down. The great Jack Lemmon trying to get coffee in the movie.
Yeah, I don't even have coffee. I got a little Diet A&W zero sugar root beer here. Take a sip of that for the working salesman.
Well, I do have a coffee here, right here. I got a coffee. And so, 3 years ago, February 5th, 3 years ago, we came out with this show. And I think the origin of that show, I always love that story because it is all about execution. It is all about just doing it. We came up with the concept, had everything ready to go, had this logo by 5 o'clock.
Yeah, I got to work in Canva really, really quickly, but it seemed like such a great opportunity because, I mean, I don't know about you, when I produce things, their social media plays a huge role in it. Like, we talk so much about community, but I really try to integrate community by being a part and listening to what the community is saying, right? So many of my guests, so many of the concepts behind shows, so many of the shows that we have started have come from a conversation or someone wrote something, or it's like, how does this fit the market right here? And I attribute like that mentality to what I learned in freight sales. And I'm sure you do too, because building a listener group, right? Building a following, it shares a lot of commonalities with sales in terms of you have to be on a lot, right? You have to be nice to people. You have to build these relationships, and they take time, right? And a lot of times, just like trying to close in sales, trying to close with the listener, it starts with clips, it starts with awareness, and it starts with being in their own comments.
It does. It's building that community, and the community. I think we had a really good timing. We got I won't say we got lucky with the timing because it was a pandemic. Nothing like this was going on, and all of a sudden we showed the picture of the podcast booth where there was just two of us in there, but oftentimes we had three. Do we ever get four people in that podcast booth at once? I think we did.
The second COVID started getting a little bit scarier, it was like, can we tear down these booth walls? The thing that you don't understand about that room if you've never been in it is A, there's no circulation, so it's really hot. But B, from like a sound perspective, it's good that it's soundless, but it's also like incredibly dead. The vocals in that booth.
And it is a very tight space. I mean, it looks like 10 times bigger than it actually is once you get in there. It looks like you have space to actually move, which you really don't.
Now we just locked Fraser in there.
I know. Do you ever miss podcast booth? Do you ever miss recording in there and having a show?
0% missing. Zero. I like that set better. I like recording at home. It was tougher when I had the apartment, during the pandemic for like the first year of it. We didn't have a house yet. I didn't get a house till March 2021. So I had like a full year of being stuck. And that was driving me insane. But that was just because like I had 1,000 square feet with my wife, dog, cat, couple, young kids. So that was troublesome. But no, I didn't really like the booth. I like to have some space to move around. I kind of gesticulate a lot. So if you put me in the booth, I might hit somebody.
That is very true. That they did move us out of the booth right when the pandemic started and moved us up into the old office. I don't know if you'd call it a studio yet. When we first got up there, and I think I have an image, a screenshot that maybe they can throw up about that. Before we even had the desk, we just had the normal workday desks in there with the big wall behind us.
That was great. That was back in the day. Emily was there, and like if we could stand things up all the time because she would like meet with us all the time and empower us to get things off the ground like that. And that is how it like something like Put That Coffee Down could come together so easily in an afternoon. It's the great thing about startups. There's not someone constantly standing in your way. And in fact, we had a great champion and a great supporter in Emily at the time who was like, yeah, you guys have a vision. Just go run with it. We'll see if it works. And that has been the mentality to a lot of shows. I mean, I've canceled more shows that I've been on at FreightWaves than are still active, But that's the great thing about podcasting. There's very little barrier to entry. You can stand something up and, after X amount of episodes, if it doesn't work, you can go on to something else or go in the direction that is working.
Yeah, and it's very low cost to get into podcasting, and you don't really have to worry about being perfect from the start. And I think that goes back to the concept of Put That Coffee Down and getting it off the ground. You'd canceled, I think, Port Report. I think that was the name of the podcast, the short-lived podcast.
Freight All Kinds, Port Report. There's been a number.
And the Port Report was kind of right before its time, right? If it'd been a year later, I think it was a very exciting market in Ocean, but it was a little bit dead in 2019. But you canceled that. You came over. We're talking about doing a show for 3PLs. We decided on sales because no one had a sales show, and we thought it'd be cool. And we came up with the name, the artwork behind me, the theme song, which I still get compliments about the theme song all the time. And I say, you can't credit me with it. It's all Dooner. He picked it out. And we had it on social media for that next week going live. We experimented quite a bit, not even with the podcast booth because that's where we recorded at the time, but we tried to do a call-in show in the early days. And that was an adventure as well.
Yeah, call-ins are always tough on like an internet show. It's not the same as because at the same time I was doing the Sirius XM show, so I was very used to on the weekend you're getting a ton of calls, but the medium is so different. Like Sirius XM, the only people who are listening to that are people that are trapped inside a vehicle calling in. So we had that's one of the things we had to get creative with early on, and that was like pre-modeling questions and putting things out to the community in advance to the show. But it was good because it allowed us to sort of not only promote the show, but seed the show and bring in the community voice to the show. We used to bring in so many comments from what people had to say. There was so much interaction, especially at the beginning when everyone was cooped up and everyone had their opinions, and there was so much insight that we could take from that, because these are people who are like actively working too. Now, we're selling shows, we're selling podcasts, we're selling FreightWaves stuff. You've got carrier lists, but like the actual community is the one that is showing up every day selling freight. And I think the biggest mistake any host can make, especially if they're not being active, is thinking they know more than the people in the trenches. And even if we were in the trenches, we don't. We're just here to facilitate conversation and bring that community together on whatever format it may be.
And I think that's a unique position of the show, and something that we crafted out from the very beginning. We're not expert salespeople. We're certainly not expert at selling, transportation services to just shippers. We've both done it in the past, and maybe because we weren't as successful as we'd like to be, we're in media. Maybe not, if we're, superstar rainmakers that had a system in place, but yeah, we're facilitators of conversation. The call-in was an adventure because of fact of getting call-ins, but the fact of the technology, it sounds really simple to do, but it turned out to be a little bit complex, especially online. But it was a nice pivot to comment driven from LinkedIn, going live, incorporating listeners into the show, especially in those early days when everyone's cooped up. A lot of people were out of work. A lot of people had slower days, especially in those early days of the pandemic, where they had their voice heard, and we read it all out on the air.
By the way, I got to give a shout out to IMC for the Freight Socks. I know, like, in the past year, Freight Socks have gotten very big. I was looking for as many pairs as I could when I was just at Manifest. But one thing I did notice there is swag has been scaled back considerably, is one thing I noticed, Kevin. You think swag works?
I agree. I noticed that at the FreightWaves conferences this year too. There's not a lot of swag out there. It's kind of going. Is it going the way of the business card? Because there's not a lot of business cards floating around anymore. And whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But I don't really ever carry a business card with me. I think LinkedIn maybe is the business card now. What do you think?
That's what I do. I intentionally don't bring business cards, and I made it a habit in sales, because what would happen is I would go to conferences, right? And you go to a couple in a row, and you'd come back and you'd have a bunch of business cards, and I wouldn't remember like who half the people were. It's like, because all the companies in this space, especially nowadays, they all have like minimalistic logos. They look exactly the same. They have the same color scheme. It's become so like homogenized. That's one thing I also noticed at Manifest. I'm like, you guys all kind of look like FreightWaves now. Like it all looks the same. It's all blue and it's all minimalistic. That's why I believe in pure maximalism on What the Truck. That's why I believe in pure in-your-faceism. Just because nobody else is doing it, they try to like make everything so clean. But yeah, I don't know. I do think the socks are cool. I think that swag can work. But in terms of the LinkedIn thing, I do two things. I take a picture of the person and I make a LinkedIn photo immediately, because I'm going to remember what you were, like your body type. And I realized this early on because I have a lot of LinkedIn connections, and you go to events and you know what people look like in a little circle, like, like this on their profile, but in person, like you don't know their body type and people kind of look different in person. So you start getting anxiety when you're at these events. I was like, do I know that person? Should I say something? They're looking at me. Do I go over there? Should I say something? I don't know if you get that experience. I got to get very visual with it. And I immediately want that LinkedIn connection, and I want to take that picture so I know to follow up with you.
I do have that same feeling, and certainly with the FreightWaves events that I went to this year, I met a lot of people in person that not only saw on their LinkedIn profiles, but had been on video calls, had interviewed on TV, on this show, these video calls. And, people, it's the same thing. You don't know the body structure. You don't know how tall they are. There's a lot of people that I thought were my height that are like 6'4", and a lot of people who are shorter than I am, or look completely different than they do on screen. And, walking around a conference, it's hard to gauge sometimes. Is that the person that I've been speaking to? It's a good conversation starter too, because you walk up, and if they are, great. If they aren't, great as well.
Yeah, I mean, like Ryan Schreiber, for example, the guy looks no bigger than 5'2" in pictures, but in person, the guy's like 6'3". You're right, Ryan? I mean, you photograph small, but you're a big guy.
You're exactly right. I mean, I would not have ever pegged Schreiber above 5'2". I mean, especially talking to him because he has a little bit of a Napoleon complex, Just kidding, Schreiber.
Hold on, we gotta applaud him. He just got a big promotion over at Metaphora. No,
Chief Growth Officer, right? Chief Growth Officer.
That's big.
Right.
I wonder how big.
The name of it.
I think it is. What is it? Is that a newer term? Is that like human resources being called like people services or whatever they changed the name to? Is how is that different than a CRO or something?
Yeah, is exactly. A chief revenue officer, a chief commercial officer, a chief growth officer. What else are you growing besides revenue and your customer base and your commercializations, right? Your partnerships. So I don't know. I asked him. I didn't get a really clear answer from him, though, what a chief growth officer is.
Kevin, what have you learned from doing the show? Because I follow our audio analytics all of the time, and for the 3-year run of this show, there's been two individual shows at the top of FreightWaves thing under FreightCast, which is like our umbrella network, and they're What the Truck and Put That Coffee Down, and that has remained consistent for the past 3 years. So what have you learned? How have you maintained that? I haven't been there for 2 of those years.
That is true. I've had a couple co-hosts, but here I am flying solo again. I think one of the things that I kind of I had suspicions about, and now I know for a fact, I think, in 3 years of doing this, is that everyone has their own sales system, right? Do what works, but there's more than one way to do sales. Do sales in the way that certainly you get the results, but fits your personality. I think that's the number one thing, right? Everyone comes out with their sales advice. You must do this. You must do that, and it comes down to it really does come down to fitting your personality. If you're good on social media and you're making sales, do that. Do what works. Leave everything else to the side and experiment often. And the people that I interview who have done that in their past, that they have their own style. And it's like, going back to one of my favorite episodes, The Last Dance, when we talked about that. If you're a basketball player, you have your own style. You have your own position. You have your own role. And in finding that and sticking with what works, you're gonna find success. And what works, usually you enjoy. And if you do that, you're gonna have success. If you're following everyone else's advice, you're gonna be lost in the woods. That makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, if I followed a lot of advice, What the Truck wouldn't look anything like what it does. It would be completely different. It would fit, but that would be someone else's advice. And if someone's giving you advice and you don't necessarily think that they could be more successful than you with that, use your instincts, right? And sometimes it hurts to ask, so don't always. Like if you have good instincts and a good idea and it's not going to harm anybody, sometimes it's best to just run with it. Because a lot of times if you ask people for advice, right, they go, okay, this person has a problem and I have to solve it. And if you ask something sort of risky, they might discourage you from doing it, and it might be an absolutely great idea. It's better off take that risk yourself, especially like one of the things you hear in social media, especially when people are starting accounts, is like they're embarrassed to share stuff because, it won't get enough likes, and they take it personally. But here's the thing. You can never grow an account if you're afraid of getting through those early periods. And when you do grow an account, there's always posts nobody sees. And here's the thing. Like, don't be embarrassed. Nobody saw it. Like, just keep growing and working on it and refining it. And also, if your own content really isn't working, look at what other people are doing well and interact and engage with them and start working with them. Like, sometimes we got to get over our own egos when we're making content too. Not everybody has to be the face of everything. Not everybody needs a podcast. Some people are great podcast guests, but the whole aspect of running a show is really, really labor intensive. Like, in terms of podcasting, anybody can do it. There's no barrier to entry, but very few can actually create a show that gets traction, that gets weekly traction, that gets daily traction, that brings in people that actually care in a community. And that just takes a ton of effort, and that takes a ton of sales. I would say even more sales than marketing, because it's such an organic push in this space. I know a lot of people want to start these things. A lot of people abandon them after 10 episodes because they get 10 listens. If you're not willing to grind podcast, you're better off as a podcast guest.
You're exactly right about that. It's a completely different ballgame whenever you're hosting and producing a podcast. It's labor intensive, and the thought processes. It's much easier to be a guest on a podcast than it is to be the quarterback, handling the time and everything else that the topic matters, the questions. I think you made a great point. The more riskier your idea, getting advice, people will shoot it down because it's perceived as risky. And usually you can go out and experiment and see if it works all on your own because no one's paying attention. No one's going to pay attention to one or two mishaps or failures. And that's the worst that can happen. That is absolutely the worst that can happen. It doesn't work. If it does work, then you de-risk everything, right? Then everyone's going to say, oh, yeah, that was such a great idea. Why didn't I think of that? Well, you probably did think about it, but you just thought it was too risky. Another thing is having listener comments, tailoring your topics to what listeners want. And I think that's something that I've learned personally, and I'm taking that forward as well. I'm working on a new product and a new project here on my own. And basically it is the structure of this is going to be based on what people want. And I'm talking to a lot of market participants, and that they keep on saying, well, how are you going to do this? I'm like, well, what do you want to buy? I'll tailor it to fit what you need. And I think that is in sales, in podcast growing, and in marketing, that is a key thing that you have to do to be successful.
What is the most important, or what's the biggest mistake that you think you've made so far in terms of running a show?
I think that the biggest mistake has been probably, especially on my own, after you left the show, keeping it at an hour, because an hour is a lot to fill. I might be able to do it now, but during that time, the last couple of years, doing a day job at FreightWaves and doing a podcast and trying to format an hour, it is an hour. Trying to fill time is far worse on the listener than it is trying to pack everything into a short amount of time. So if you can do that, I think that is important. But that's probably been my biggest mistake.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because audio podcasts, I've always had the philosophy that content dictates length. And one of the challenges with TV is you get boxed in, or at least in our format, you have 26 minutes or you have 56 minutes. Regardless of what you have to say, you've got to fill that cup up. Now, that took a little bit for me to adjust to with What the Truck. I'm pretty sure we're there with that. But yeah, it can be tough to fill especially in sales. I mean, one of the reasons that I left that show to focus more on What the Truck is I just felt like I said everything I had to say about sales. The one thing, and I'm curious how you sort of keep this going, because I get so tired with the LFG, motivational content. I feel like Chat GPT can replace that type of person the quickest, because they all just sort of you gotta put in the numbers, let's effing go. And it's you gotta post content every day, regardless of what you have to say, just create noise. And it's really, no, that doesn't sound like a strategy. I mean, maybe post every day, but think about the content. Don't just post to post. You see this on LinkedIn happen all the time. There's people dispensing this advice, and then the daily content is what they had for breakfast before going for a jog, which is fine, but when it looks like you're just wasting your followers' time because you're trying to put content every day because that's what you post, that's when it's maybe it's time to refine the strategy. You've got the reps in, and I think that's the important thing in sales or in anything too, is you have to keep scaling, right? You learn that discipline, right? So you learn discipline to go every day. You learn the discipline to make the calls every day, but the calls don't make it. That is just part of a process. What are you doing during the call? What are you doing during the post? That's what you get to once you've established that behavior.
You're exactly right about that. How do I keep on going? I have great guests. I have awesome guests, and I want to learn their story. I don't want to develop content myself, that LFG, that motivational. I do it a little bit, but I want my guests to be the motivational people.
Speaker.
I'm a demotivational speaker. That's exactly No, but I want them to have a stage. I want to hear their story. I want to learn their evolution, whether sales or entrepreneurship, kind of the same thing, right? Two sides of the same coin, and get their perspective and learn little tips and tricks. So maybe it's just selfish. I just want to learn more and more and more about what other people are doing, incorporate what I like and what I can incorporate into my life and certainly sales going forward.
Any guests stick out that has blown your mind?
You know what? It's hard to think about it right now. I've had some really good guests, especially lately. We've got about 30 seconds here, so I won't mention anybody. But I've been doing a lot more audio only, where I'm not bound by time and it can be more of a conversation. I'm really starting to enjoy that and getting to know people. But the biggest names, the Wolf of Wall Street, that was interesting. David, not really blow my mind. But anyway, we really are out of time. Dooner, thanks for joining me today. If you haven't watched What the Truck, go watch What the Truck. And that wraps it for this episode of Put That Coffee Down.
I got friends only want to talk business. I got expensive because winning's expensive. I got expensive because winning's expensive. I've been getting all the work. And I've been shutting down the stars.